This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
So, good morning, Dodge. Leaked documents show that HSBC helped a lot of rich people hide billions of tax money. Does this further ruin the bad reputations of banks, and how do you treat banking riskiness in your investments?
Yes, Julian, good morning. It is unfortunate, but yes, it is going to put a lot more pressure on banks, particularly the large international ones. We're being very careful. We're not adding to our bank riskiness at all. We're not adding to the banks. We do have some very long-term. It's going to be a while for it to shake out to see what banks are going to be able to benefit from the ultimate regulatory changes that are going to have to come through. But at this point, we're not adding, and we're watching very carefully how each bank reacts to the changing economic and regulatory environment.
And of course, we've heard of all the fines in the United States on people like JP Morgan and so on. Do you think banks have adequately provided for fines and even for perhaps lawsuits?
No, I don't, Julian. And I look at it much well beyond just the dollar amounts. Regulation now is at least closing the stable door after the horses are out. HSBC Swiss problems have attracted the attention of U.S., France, Argentina, and Britain may yet join the fray. So regulatory and legal sanctions of individuals, which now still is a rarity, are moving up on the agenda, so that's another risk. Beyond fines, banks face the possibility of being hit for much higher capital charges to reflect the heightened operational risk of doing business everywhere, including your neck of the woods. But that's not the whole picture. You have to take a look. The fact dwindling profitability and multiplying compliance headaches have forced banks to dump ever more of their international consumer networks. We think this trend is going to continue for a while. And you take a look at Great Britain, at the UK. You look at what they're going through. Many directors of banks applying to operate in London right now are required to visit the branches in person to verify their identities. There's one U.S. customer who's been asked to provide more information that he puts in his returns to our IRS, our tax authorities. It is driving business away from the U.K., and it looks like the Netherlands and Belgium are going to become the popular alternatives. That's just one very specific example, Julian. I think it's going to be more than that, and this is the risk that we see, not just the rules, not just the cost and the lawsuits. It's going to, for a while, until we get our hands around, the world gets its hands around what is happening, the risk is more than just the dollars.
So it looks as though that the world has to coordinate some kind of body of rules governing all these banks. Otherwise, money would flow from a very tight regulation to the jurisdictions that are lax. Do you think that this is kind of like a very big challenge for regulators?
Yes, it is, and it's going to be the short-term result of this, Julian, is it's going to be an overreaction by the regulatory bodies across the world, so that there will be overregulation, and it won't really help the situation. But it's the only way that they'll come to grips with it, and then they'll be able to figure out what is not necessary and start to pare back. And yes, there will be a flow of funds between countries, but I suspect that that's going to, within the next 6 to 9 months, that will stop, because I think that worldwide there'll be a greater consistency rather than having specific countries to be more lenient. I think there'll be an overall compromise across the world that will bring different countries together. Not that they will be coordinating, it just will happen as a matter of fact.
And Dodge, I know that you said earlier that you're not adding banks, but from a valuations viewpoint, what do banks look like? And do you think investors feel they have to factor in some kind of discount for future scandals?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Goldman Sachs made a presentation to investors Tuesday, I guess it was, and it was clear that their long-standing dominance in the work for clients' equity underwriting, M&A advice, asset management, still is where their profits are going to come. They opened their presentation with a section called Safety and Soundness, something that would have been inconceivable back in 2007. Goldman Sachs highlighted that the total common equity had nearly doubled since 2007, and they pointed to their leverage ratio that has more than halved to 10 times. Now, figures such as this would terrify bank investors a decade ago. But the fact that Goldman, of all firms, is touting these upfront now tells you all you need to know about present-day bank investing.
And of course, can we differentiate between good banks and bad banks? And if we could, what would be the likely banks that you would buy?
Well, we are holding off on the major banks, what is really interesting, Julian, is last week, a week ago, we were looking at shorting opportunities with Citibank closing below 48 and Capital One closing below $77.50, and also J.P. Morgan Chase. Those banks have actually rallied in this last week, so they're no longer on the short list for selling on our sell list. They are more wait and see, and there may be a further rally. The opportunities that we're seeing short term are very specific and in the less than international type names. Bank of Hawaii, for example, who operates in Hawaii, Guam, and other Pacific Islands, is on our list as a buy. First Horizon National, these Huntington Bancshares, these are banks that are not well known internationally, but are providing very specific opportunities, particularly because they don't have the large international presence or are subject to the international regulations that the larger banks are involved with. Discover Financial Services is on our sell list. American Express is on our sell list. The financial-related firms are being hit more now than the U.S. banks. So we're being very careful. We're looking at some of the smaller banks for buying opportunities shorter term. I suspect that as banks react to the international consequences and become more involved with a longer-term strategy, there will be opportunities, and we will be investing again. Some of the banks that we've held for a longer term, we certainly are not going to sell because of the short-term glitch. But although it may be short-term in nature, Julian, the impact of international banking is going to be much farther reaching and longer term.
Thank you. That was Dodger Dolan, Chief Investment Officer at Lander & Fuse Capital Managers in New York.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.